Okay, it looks like we have a little bit of a smaller crowd today, but maybe it'll grow by a few. But welcome to everyone who's with us. And I wanted to continue in the pattern that I have been going, which is continuing along the text of the Moreh Nevuchim of Rambam, and in order, and then jump to some topics that I found interesting later on. So kind of jump around a little. So where we were up to was chapter 13 of part 1. Chapter 15. Chapter 15 of part 1. That's where we were about to start. And this is where Rambam is going through the different languages, the different words and terminology, and how to properly interpret it when the Torah uses these terms, these Hebrew terms. And after that, I'm going to go back to continue in chapter 46, which is where right after Rambam completes his sampling of terms, right? Then he goes into why the Bible decided to describe God in ways that sound anthropomorphic, sound human, even though clearly he's not, and why the Torah taught it that way. So we began that last week. So right now I'm going to start from the beginning of chapter 15. And I'm also going to have an open question that I want to open to the public. Maybe we'll have a few minutes at the end. I want people to think a little bit, because everyone on here comes from a different type of background. Our knowledge is different. Our background, how we grew up, what kind of education we had, our knowledge of Judaism is different on different levels, and what we are learning from Rambam so far. I'm curious to hear from people to say, what have I learned so far? Because we've been through, I think this is lecture 15, give or take 1 or 2. I want to know if people have what we've picked up so far, what we've gained so far. So think about that a little as we go through this. So for starters, in the Pines version, we are at part 1, chapter 15, which is page 40 of the Pines. And it's talking about the Hebrew word Nitzav or Yatzav, right? Which literally means to stand. But in Hebrew, as we find in many adjectives, there's many different words for stand, right? Rambam in the last few chapters talked about lakum, to get up, right? And la'amod, which is usually to stand. Lahatziv or nitzav means not just to stand, but to stand erect, to stand at attention. So it doesn't just mean to stand, but it means a certain type of standing. And we'll find that that term in the Torah is often used in description of God, and which is why Rambam decides to talk to us a little bit about what this word means when it says God stands. It's really important, because when the Torah chooses to describe God as la'amod, that kind of standing is not the same. And this is where the Torah gets completely lost when you translate it into another language. So when you read it not in its original Hebrew, you often completely lose that nuance, because the English just translates it as stand, whereas Rambam is pointing out to us that there's many different types of standing. So now let's talk a little bit about nitzav or yatzav. Okay, so or to stand erect. So I'm going to read in the Pines, and as my usual style, I'm going to paraphrase, maybe jump to the Hebrew kapach, back and forth. So these two roots are different. Their meaning, as you know, is identical in all the various forms. In other words, even though yatzav and nitzav are different in terms of the 3 letters that comprise the Hebrew root, all Semitic languages are based on 3-letter roots. And Hebrew, just like all the other Semitic languages, are that way. So yatzav and nitzav are 2 different ones, but they mean the same thing. The term is equivocal. Sometimes it has the meaning of rising and being erect. So the first example is by the story of Miriam, where Miriam was standing and watching Moshe. She had released Moshe in a basket on the Nile River floating, right? So it says, and his sister stood erect far off. she was standing at attention, watching carefully, right? So that's the idea of why the Torah uses that word. She wasn't just standing in the distance, but she was standing in the distance with a capital S, watching carefully to see what's happening. Her sister stood, the kings of the earth stood erect. That's from Psalms, or they came out and stood erect. The idea here is that when the Hebrew for that is Vatetatsa b'achoto merachok, and his sister stood from a distance. Yatzu Nitzavim, they went standing. They didn't just walk out, but they walked out standing straight and proud and tall. And so the idea is, when it comes to heaven, when the term has another meaning, to be stable and permanent. And now this is where it comes to reference God. Thus, when it says, thy word stands erect in heaven, right, which is also from Psalms, which in Hebrew stands, Dvarcha Nitzav b'shamayim, your words are standing erect in heaven. What does it mean that God's words are standing erect? It means that his words, God's instructions, are stable and constant, right? They don't just stand, but they stand. They're constant. They never fail. In all cases where this term occurs with reference to the Creator, this is what it means. So when it refers to standing, reference to God, it always means that God is constant and God is stable. That's the reason why it chooses that as a description. Thus, for another example, in Genesis, it says, and behold, the Lord stood erect upon it. This is talking about the famous story, and Rambam is now going to go onto a little explanation of Jacob or Yaakov when he was having the dream about the ladder, the famous ladder where the angels are going up and down from the heavens to the earth. And it says there that God was standing upon it, right? V'hinei Hashem Nitzav alav. That's the Hebrew, right? And God was standing. What does that mean? That means, because in this dream, what Jacob is seeing, he's seeing the process of communication between God and his people on earth. What's the communication between the two? And the first thing you need to know is, and the first thing the verse says, is that God's presence over the earth is constant, is stable, which is why it chooses not just la'amod, God was standing there, but God was nitzav. God was standing erect, because it's constant. Now that we got that, now we can understand a little bit more about what the representation of the ladder is. I'm going to the Hebrew kapach now. God was standing above this ladder, which one edge was in the heaven, and and the other edge, the bottom was in the earth. And on this ladder, there was climbing and elevating themselves. Kol misha ola. The angels going up is not a reference to angels, but it's the idea of any person, any being that ascends towards God, right? Any being that ascends. And what does that mean? Rambam already explained to us in previous chapters what it means when a person ascends to God. What that means is a person gains more apprehension, gains more understanding. A person comes closer to God by learning more about him, by understanding more. That's what it means to ascend. Rambam already explained that to us. So now that he did that, now he can explain to us what it means. When a person sees angels, remember, Rambam is not a big believer in these kinds of things as beings themselves. Rambam uses them mostly to be a reference to some concept that we can understand, that we can handle, right? Something that's more tangible. This is us ascending by getting closer and closer to understanding God. Until you get to the point where you truly understand that he is constant. Why? Because at the top of the ladder is when you finally comprehend God's constancy, God's realness, God's stability. And this is why it says God is standing upon it, because that is the ultimate end, what you achieve when you climb up that ladder. And that's why it says, Umalachei Elohim Hanavim, that the angels of God, this is referring in Rambam's understanding, the prophets, meaning the prophets that comprehend God and God speaks to them, right? Those are the ones that are called a malach. Okay, so and therefore the Rambam says, and how wise is it that it speaks of the ascent, olim v'yordim, ha'aliyah lefnei reader. First, you have to go up and comprehend God. First, you have to achieve that level of intellect, that level of understanding. then God so-called speaks to you. And how does God speak to you? By giving you that apprehension, by allowing you to understand more. It's that give and take. You need to do the work to go up first, and then you receive that wisdom that God gives you coming down. After going up and up and up on these ladders, if you might be able to follow in the English with me, but I'm reading from the Hebrew Kappa. All right, that's when God gives the commander, meaning God himself, starts to tell you messages. That's when you learn. First, you have to work to comprehend, then you could learn. And that's when you learn how you're supposed to act, how you're supposed to behave, what kinds of things you're supposed to know. And that's what's called Yerida, like we already explained. Going down refers, when it says God goes down, it means God gives us apprehension, gives us understanding, instructs us on how to live. So therefore, none of this yatziv is referring to anything having to do with a body standing. Now I'm going to go back to the English, the last few sentences on the bottom of 41. It has thus been made clear to you that as far as this purpose is concerned, the terms to stand erect, meaning Nitzav, right, and to stand amad, have the same meaning, right? That for this they have a similar meaning. For Scripture also says, "Behold, I will stand before thee here upon the rock in Choreb, and ani omed lifanecha sham al Tzur b'Choreb." I am going to stand in front of you on the rock, and Rambam is giving us a lead into the next chapter because he's going to talk about rock. And rock, as many of us are familiar, especially those of us that the Israeli Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel starts with Tzur Yisrael, right? Refers to God as the rock of Israel. That theme, the God as a rock, comes up a lot, and Rambam is going to explain that next. And it flows because God stands as a rock. So just like standing meant stands constant, so a rock has a special meaning which he's going to deal with in chapter 16. But before I talk about rock, anyone have anything to say about Rambam and what he said about Nitzav, standing? Go ahead. You can unmute yourself to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking of the word matzeva, monument.
Oh, that's really good, because matzeva is usually a rock, a monument, right? And yes. and it's called a rock because it stands. Okay, that's good. Very good, and it kind of leads in nicely to the next chapter. Any else want to comment on those words, Latziv? If not, I'm going to go and read about a rock, and after that, Rambam kind of at chapter 17. I'm definitely going to do with you after that, because it's he as Rambam warned us, this book is going to jump all over the place. So he's going word by word by word. Everything seems to go in order, and all of a sudden he throws something in there. But I'm giving away a little bit too much in the beginning. Let's wait till we see this next chapter. So first, let's talk about the rock. So a Tzur. Now remember, those of us that have any familiarity with Hebrew, and if you don't, then you'll just have to take my word for it. There's lots of words for rock in Hebrew. What word comes out to anyone that has some familiarity when you think about a rock?
Well, what about, is the word kefa, is that Hebrew or is that Aramaic?
Wait, say that again. Which word?
Kefa is that Cephas kefa? Would that be Aramaic?
I think that's Aramaic. Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to think how I would spell that, but it could mean keva, like something that's solid, something that's fixed.
Evan.
Evan, yeah. Someone said Evan, right? Okay, so Evan is one word. Matzeva was mentioned before. Tzur we mentioned. Could anybody think of some others? I could think of tzuror. I could think of chalamish, right? Like a certain type of rock. Sela. I don't know. Those are just off the top of my head. So there's a lot of words for rock, right? So what does each one mean? But Tzur, the one that's chosen when it's referencing God, Tzur has a special meaning. So that's the next one he's going to talk about. A Tzur, Rambam tells us, literally means is a mountain. Now this is important because we're trusting the translators of Rambam from his original Judeo-Arabic, right? And he used the term mountain, right? So meaning a large, a cliff, a mountain, because he says vihikisa batzur. Rambam understood when Moses was told to hit the rock, what Moses was actually being told was to hit a mountain. Now, this is hinting a little bit, because remember, Rambam always looks for scientifically plausible explanations for miracles. And this is not at all coincidental that Rambam understood Moshe hitting the rock with a stick as bringing out a spring of water, which naturally comes out of the mountain. So making it look as little that's Rambam's constant approach to everything. So I'm just noting this because it's not the theme of this chapter. It will be in later chapters, but you'll understand that according to Rambam, almost always when God performs miracles, there always is a scientifically reasonable explanation to how it happened, right? So of course God is doing it, but it can easily be explained by saying, oh, he hit the mountain and opened a hole and the spring came flowing out. Okay, so I'm just kind of giving that little hint, so it's not coincidental, but that isn't the subject of this particular chapter, but Rambam drops us that hint. V'hu shem even kasha. It is the name of a particular type of hard, solid stone, kigon hachalamish, charvot tzurim. Wait, I apologize. I need to silence my phone. I'm going to pause this for a second. Give me 1 minute. I'm sorry about that. I might get disturbed soon. I apologize, but it is what it is. Anyway, so okay, so what is this tzur? It is further a term denoting the quarry from which quarry stones are hewn. A tzur also refers not just to a rock, but a rock from which one takes other rocks. And this is important. Thus it says, Hibitu el tzur chutzavtem. Those words come from Isaiah, from Yeshayahu in chapter 51, where he tells the people of Israel, look from whom you came. Look where you came from. And he continues to tell them, you came from your father Abraham. In other words, be like him, act like him. Remember where you came from. Remember the quarry from which you were hewn. So that's and it is this issue which is why God is called a rock. So before, the idea of Nitzav was referring to God's stability, God's constancy, right? God's solidness, so to speak. Here it's talking about God as the source of everything. Okay, so therefore, the foundation of anything, the place from which everything came. And therefore, Isaiah said, "He bitu al tzur chutzavtem." Look upon the tzur, the rock from which the quarry from which you have been quarried. He bitu al Avraham avicham. Look at Abraham, your forefather, as if it is explaining from which quarry were you quarried? Abraham, your forefather. Therefore, go in his footsteps. Keep his religion, keep his ideas that he taught you, act in the way he acted, because it's necessary that the mitziot, the qualities, the foundation of what makes a person or anything is found in where it came from. If you have a quarry that has a certain type of stone, then the stone you took from the quarry will be that type of stone. Right, and that's why it's it's because of this that it calls God a tzur, a rock, because God is the origin of and the reason for the existence of everything that exists other than God Himself. Therefore, it says hatzur tamim polo. God is the tzur, the rock, for whom everything He does is perfect. Tzur yulod chateshi, tzur mikarmin, and He gives several examples for that. Right, of the rock that begot thee. Their rock had given them over. So when it refers to God as the rock, and it's Ein Tzur Kelokenu, there is no Tzur Olamim. God is the rock of forever. The Nitzav To'al Tzur. when God is talking to Moshe, when God is talking to Moses, and he tells him, and Moses is begging God to see his essence, and God says no. What does God do? He says, stand here on this Tzur, by this rock. The idea being, right, that that remember to be that God is the first principle. God is from which everything has come, and that is, and this is the entryway through which you shall come to him, as we made clear when we were saying, behold, there is a place next to me. So these are it looks like I'm gonna have to head to the hospital soon, guys, so I'm gonna have to cut this short. All right, hold on. I apologize, but this is going to have to end tonight's lecture because I have someone in active labor and I got to get going to the hospital. But we did manage. What? Sorry.
I say good luck with it.
Yeah, thank you. I do. I'm sorry because this next chapter is really cool, chapter 17. So but we'll have to pick up from there next week. But we did manage to learn something. And I'm glad everyone came. I really appreciate it. And God willing, we'll take this up next week. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Good
You well.
luck.
Bye-bye. Thanks. All right.